Is why we need to, because he meets with us. We were talking this morning at the prayer, another big plug for the prayer on Sunday mornings at 10:15, and we were talking about a few bits, and as we were praying, I just got this picture of what are we like? We're simply like a vessel. Some of us are really good-looking vessels, some of us not so much, and might be a bit balding. Is that right? Yeah. And we, our vessel, sometimes the vessels that we're given isn't always the vessels that we want. And we find ourselves, the vessels where we find ourselves is not always the place or the shelf that you'd want your vessel to be. And sometimes those vessels are used in purposes that we don't want them to be. Yet that's how God has designed us. And sometimes we fill ourselves, those vessels, with stuff, our own desires, resentment. We're looking at forgiveness today, but it's so easy to our pride, our self. And what, as a Christian, we do is we come as we are, but we empty ourselves of all of ourself. And we allow God to fill us with goodness. And so we can't change the vessel and the place that we find ourselves, but we find that in our difficulties and our weakness, he is strong and he fills us with good things. So we were looking at Philemon today. That bit's just a side issue. We're looking at Philemon today, and if you're looking online, we covered a little bit of that earlier, the main story. But basically is this man, possibly quite a wealthy man. He led a church, and he led the church in his house. And this man had a slave, it would appear, and this slave did a runner. It obviously had enough, disappeared. We don't know whether he took anything. But the process of this slave leaving created something for this man Philemon, and there must have been a time of real resentment, bitterness, maybe anger. And this slave has run off, and he's met with Paul the apostle, and Paul's told him about Jesus, and that's totally transformed him. He's now become a believer. And Paul, knowing what is the right thing to do, says to the slave, you need to go back, you need to restore, you need to be faithful and go back to where you came. And Philemon is asked, Paul says to him, I could tell you to take him back and to treat him with kindness and gentleness, but I'm going to ask you to take him back because in verse 5, it says that Paul says, I'm thankful because I keep hearing of your faith in Jesus and your love for God's people. So Philemon was someone who day to day loved people. He lived out what God had done and the good news of the gospel. And Paul was absolutely sure that because Philemon lived a life like this, he didn't have to tell Philemon to take this guy back. He said, I just think you're going to do it. I'm just asking you to do it because of your love, because you know that's the right thing to do. And we, I gave the story just a minute ago of times when I've got angry, where God just speaks and he says, you need to restore. You need to show grace and compassion and love because that's the way God does stuff. God is love. Did you know that? Have you experienced that? God is love. So anything he's going to do, anything he asks you to do, it will involve love because love binds it all together. There's some fantastic verses in the Bible. Read 1 Corinthians 13 to have a look at love. So in verse 6 in Philemon, he says, I want, you need to understand, as you understand, sorry, let's backtrack slightly, let's get the verse and read it. Can we have a look at that on the screen, if that's okay? So it's Philemon verse 6, and what it says here is, and I'm praying, so this is Paul, he's talking to Philemon, and he's saying, I'm praying that you will put into action the generosity that comes from your faith. So faith in Jesus, as a result of that, generosity is there. The more that you know Jesus and the more that you realize that he's very good and he's very kind and he's very generous, the more you realize that actually we're called to do the same. And it's only as it's God puts stuff in our hands just to give out to other people. And whenever we give something that he gives us to other people, we withdraw our hand and we find that he's given us another big dunking, another portion, and we can give it out to someone else. And even when we're totally feeling useless and broken and frustrated, if you pray and you come before God and say, would you use me?